Your mind is a battlefield, and right now you're losing. Not because you're weak, not because you're broken, but because you've been trained to fight the wrong war. Every thought that spirals, every decision you second-guess, every scenario you replay until 3 in the morning, it's all evidence of one thing. You've been taught to think more when you should have been taught to think less. But Niccolò Machiavelli understood something about mental clarity that modern self-help gurus will never tell you. The problem isn't that you think too much. The problem is that you think without purpose. In a world that profits from your confusion, mental clarity isn't just an advantage, it's a weapon. And the one who wields it doesn't just survive the chaos, they orchestrate it. Because here's what no one wants you to realize. Your overthinking isn't a flaw in your programming. It's a feature someone else installed. Every anxious loop, every mental spiral, every moment you spend paralyzed by options, that's energy being drained from where it should be going. Into action, into power, into the kind of cold, calculated decisions that reshape reality instead of just reacting to it. Machiavelli didn't write about mental health. He wrote about mental dominance, the ability to see clearly when others are blind, to decide swiftly when others hesitate, to act with precision while others drown in their own thoughts. This isn't meditation. This isn't mindfulness. This is strategic thinking weaponized against the noise that keeps you small, scattered, and safe. Most people think clarity comes from understanding everything. Machiavelli knew it comes from understanding what matters. The difference between these two approaches isn't subtle. It's the difference between being a philosopher and being a prince. One thinks endlessly about the world. The other shapes it. And if you want to stop being a victim of your own mind, you need to start thinking like someone who has something to lose if they don't act. Because here's the brutal truth about overthinking. It's not analysis. It's avoidance disguised as intelligence. You tell yourself you're being thorough, but what you're really doing is postponing the moment when you have to stand behind a decision and face the consequences. Every what-if scenario you explore, every angle you consider, every pro and con list you make, it's all just sophisticated procrastination. And procrastination, no matter how intellectual it sounds, is still fear wearing a mask. Machiavelli would look at the modern world and see exactly what he saw in Renaissance Italy. People paralyzed by too many options, too much information, too many voices telling them what to think and how to feel. But he would also see the same opportunity he saw then. In a world of confused minds, the clear thinker doesn't just win. They dominate without effort. Because when everyone else is stuck in analysis paralysis, moving with certainty becomes a superpower. The first thing you need to understand is this. Your mind wasn't designed for the world you're living in. It evolved to handle immediate, concrete threats, predators you could see, dangers you could fight or flee from, problems with clear solutions. But now you're asking it to process infinite streams of information, abstract possibilities, and problems that exist only in your imagination. No wonder it's breaking down. You're running ancient software on modern hardware, and the system is crashing. But Machiavelli wouldn't tell you to adapt your mind to the modern world. He'd tell you to use your ancient instincts to cut through modern noise. Because underneath all the complexity, all the options, all the overthinking, most decisions still come down to the same primal calculations. What serves your interests? What moves you toward your goals? What can you control versus what you cannot? The rest is just static. Think about the last time you made a decision quickly and confidently. Not impulsively, but with that rare combination of speed and certainty that feels almost supernatural. What was different about that moment? You weren't weighing every possible outcome. You weren't consulting every opinion. You weren't trying to predict the future or control variables beyond your reach. You saw what needed to be done, and you did it. That's not luck. That's mental clarity in its natural state. The reason that state feels so rare isn't because you lack the capacity for it. It's because you've been conditioned out of it. Every time someone told you to think it through, every time you were punished for acting too quickly, every time you were rewarded for showing your work instead of just showing results, you were being trained to distrust your own judgment, to seek permission instead of forgiveness, to analyze instead of act. Machiavelli saw this pattern in the leaders of his time. The ones who succeeded weren't necessarily the smartest or the most careful. They were the ones who could cut through complexity and see what actually mattered. They understood that in a world of infinite information, attention becomes the scarcest resource, and whoever controls their attention controls their outcomes. Your overthinking isn't random. It follows patterns, and those patterns reveal what you're really afraid of. You don't overthink decisions you don't care about. You don't spiral about outcomes that don't matter to you. The mental loops that trap you are always circling around the same core fears. Fear of making the wrong choice. Fear of looking foolish. Fear of losing what you have or never getting what you want. And until you name these fears, they'll continue to masquerade as rational analysis. But here's where Machiavelli's approach becomes surgical. He didn't believe in conquering fear. He believed in making fear irrelevant. Not by becoming fearless, but by becoming so clear on what you value and what you're building towards that the fear of making a mistake becomes smaller than the fear of making no decision at all. That's when overthinking stops being a habit and starts being a choice. And once it's a choice, you can choose differently. Most people try to solve overthinking by thinking better. They learn new frameworks, develop better decision-making processes, create more sophisticated ways to analyze their options. But that's like trying to put out a fire with gasoline. The problem isn't that you're thinking wrong. The problem is that you're thinking when you should be sensing, feeling, moving. Machiavelli understood that the body often knows before the mind does. Your instincts are processing information at a level your conscious mind can't access. This doesn't mean becoming impulsive or reckless. It means learning to distinguish between useful analysis and mental masturbation. Useful analysis moves you toward action. It clarifies options, eliminates variables, and builds confidence in your next move. Mental masturbation feels productive but leads nowhere. It generates more questions than answers, more complexity than clarity, more confusion than confidence. The difference isn't always obvious in the moment, but it becomes clear when you look at the results. After useful analysis, you feel energized and ready to move. After mental masturbation, you feel drained and more confused than when you started. Your mind knows the difference, even when your ego doesn't want to admit it. Machiavelli would tell you that mental clarity isn't about having all the answers. It's about asking the right questions. Not what could go wrong, but what must go right. Not how to avoid all risks, but which risks are worth taking. Not how to make the perfect decision, but how to make decisions you can live with and learn from. Because in a world that changes faster than your ability to analyze it, the capacity to move with incomplete information becomes more valuable than the ability to think with perfect precision. The next principle cuts deeper. Machiavelli observed that powerful minds don't seek certainty, they create it. While others wait for perfect information, the clear thinker moves with what they have and adjusts as reality unfolds. This isn't gambling. It's understanding that action generates information that analysis never could. Every step you take reveals the next step. Every decision you make clarifies the next decision. But standing still reveals nothing except your own hesitation. Your overthinking creates the illusion of progress while keeping you trapped in the same mental prison. You research every angle, consider every possibility, weigh every factor. But all this mental activity is just elaborate avoidance of the one thing that actually matters. The moment when you stop preparing and start performing. Because no amount of thinking can substitute for the feedback that comes from engaging with reality. This is where most people's mental clarity breaks down. They confuse preparation with paralysis. They think thoroughness means considering every possible outcome, when it really means understanding the few outcomes that could fundamentally change everything. Machiavelli would focus on the variables that could destroy him or elevate him. Everything else was noise. Look at your current mental loops. How much energy are you spending on scenarios that, even if they happened, wouldn't significantly impact your core objectives? How many hours have you lost to worries that exist only in your imagination? How often do you find yourself solving problems that haven't occurred and may never occur? This isn't strategic thinking. It's mental self-sabotage disguised as conscientiousness. The clear mind operates like a filter, not a sponge. It doesn't absorb every piece of information or entertain every possibility. It ruthlessly eliminates what doesn't serve the current mission. Machiavelli understood that attention is finite and focus is everything. The person who can maintain clarity about what matters most while everyone else gets lost in details doesn't just have an advantage. They become inevitable. But here's what makes this approach dangerous to implement. Society rewards the appearance of careful deliberation. You're praised for being thorough, for considering all sides, for taking your time with important decisions. But this conditioning is designed to keep you manageable, predictable, safe. The moment you start cutting through complexity and moving with decisive clarity, you become harder to control. Your actions become harder to predict. Your outcomes become harder to limit. Machiavelli saw this in the political arena. The leaders who spent months debating strategy were consistently outmaneuvered by those who could see the essential elements and act while others were still talking. The same pattern plays out in your personal life. While you're analyzing whether to start that business, someone else starts it. While you're debating whether to have that difficult conversation, the relationship deteriorates. While you're considering your options consider other people. This doesn't mean becoming reckless or impulsive. It means becoming surgical in your thinking. When faced with a decision, Machiavelli would ask 3 questions and only 3 questions. What outcome do I want? What's the most direct path to that outcome? What's the worst case if I move now versus if I wait? Everything else is intellectual entertainment. Your mind will resist this simplicity because complexity feels safer. If you're considering many variables, you feel like you're being responsible. If you're weighing all options, you feel like you're being smart. But feeling responsible and being effective are different things. Feeling smart and being decisive are different things. Machiavelli cared more about results than feelings. The mental clarity he advocated isn't cold or emotionless. It's hot with purpose. It's burning with the intensity of someone who knows exactly where they're going and refuses to be distracted by every shiny object or scary shadow along the way. This kind of focus creates its own energy, its own momentum, its own magnetic pull that draws resources and opportunities toward you. Most people's minds are like scattered light, illuminating everything weakly. Mental clarity is like a laser, concentrating all that mental energy into a beam so focused it can cut through steel. The difference isn't intelligence or talent. It's direction. It's the willingness to point all your mental resources toward a single target instead of spreading them across 100 different concerns. This concentration of mental energy creates what Machiavelli would recognize as presence. When you're not scattered across a dozen different worries and possibilities, people feel it. Your attention becomes valuable because it's not freely given. Your words carry weight because they're not diluted by uncertainty. Your decisions inspire confidence because they come from a place of clarity, not confusion. But the most profound shift happens internally. When you stop entertaining every thought that enters your mind, when you stop following every mental rabbit trail, When you stop giving equal consideration to likely outcomes and unlikely fears, something remarkable happens. The noise in your head doesn't just decrease, it transforms into signal. Your intuition sharpens, your instincts quicken, your natural decision-making abilities, freed from the burden of constant second-guessing, begin to operate at their full capacity. This is what Machiavelli understood about mental clarity. It's not a skill you develop through practice. It's a natural capacity you uncover by removing the obstacles you've placed in front of it. Every mental habit that serves anxiety instead of action, every thought pattern that generates confusion instead of clarity, every internal voice that speaks for fear instead of purpose. The path forward isn't about learning to think better. It's about learning to think less, but with devastating precision. To move from the scattered mentality of someone trying to control everything to the focused mentality of someone who controls what matters and ignores the rest. Because in a world designed to fragment your attention and paralyze your decision-making, the person who can cut through noise and act with clarity doesn't just succeed. They dominate the very chaos that defeats everyone else. Your overthinking isn't just holding you back. It's broadcasting your weakness to everyone around you. Every moment you spend trapped in analysis paralysis, every decision you delay while weighing endless variables, every conversation where you hedge your words with maybes and what ifs, you're sending a signal. And that signal says one thing: I can be moved, I can be shaken. I am not solid ground. Machiavelli would see your mental confusion and recognize it immediately as a strategic vulnerability. Not because you lack intelligence, but because you've made your intelligence work against itself. You've turned your greatest asset into your greatest liability. The very capacity for deep thought that could make you formidable has become the prison that keeps you weak. Here's what separates the mentally clear from the mentally clouded. It's not information. It's not analysis. It's not even wisdom. It's the ability to act on partial information with full commitment. While others wait for perfect clarity, the decisive mind creates clarity through action. While others seek more data, the clear mind recognizes that most decisions are reversible, and the few that aren't require courage, not calculation. Think about the people who command your respect, the ones whose presence shifts the energy in a room, the ones whose words carry weight even when they speak softly, the ones who seem to navigate complexity with an ease that borders on supernatural. They're not smarter than you. They're not more informed than you. They're simply operating from a different mental framework, one where clarity trumps complexity, where decisiveness beats deliberation, where movement matters more than perfection. This framework isn't built on confidence. It's built on something deeper. It's built on the understanding that in an uncertain world, your ability to move decisively with incomplete information is your greatest competitive advantage. Because while everyone else is still gathering data, you're already 3 moves ahead. While they're debating the risks, you're managing the reality. But here's where most people get it wrong. They think mental clarity means having all the answers. Machiavelli knew it meant asking fewer questions. The right questions. The questions that lead to action rather than endless analysis. Not what might happen, but what you'll do when it does. Not whether this is the perfect choice, but whether you can live with the consequences and learn from whatever unfolds. Your mind becomes clear, not when you eliminate uncertainty, but when you make peace with it. When you stop demanding guarantees from a world that offers none. When you start moving forward despite the fog instead of waiting for it to lift. Because the fog never fully lifts. There's always another variable to consider, another risk to evaluate, another angle to analyze. The clear mind moves through the fog. The confused mind waits for perfect visibility that never comes. This is why Machiavelli's approach to mental clarity feels almost violent to the overthinking mind. It requires you to cut off entire branches of thought that feel important but serve no purpose, to ignore possibilities that feel real but have no bearing on your actual choices. To silence internal voices that speak eloquently, but say nothing useful. Most people can't do this because they've confused mental activity with mental productivity. They think more thoughts equal better thinking. More considerations equal better decisions. More analysis equals better outcomes. But Machiavelli understood that mental power comes from concentration, not expansion. From depth, not breadth. From precision, not volume. The clear mind operates like a blade, sharp, focused, cutting through resistance with minimal effort. The overthinking mind operates like a hammer, powerful but clumsy, creating more noise than progress, exhausting itself with unnecessary force. You don't need a bigger hammer. You need a sharper blade. And here's the final piece that transforms this from strategy to reality. Mental clarity isn't something you achieve once and maintain forever. It's something you choose, moment by moment, decision by decision, thought by thought. Every time you catch yourself spiraling into analysis that leads nowhere, you have a choice. Every time you feel the familiar pull of mental loops that generate heat but no light, you can choose differently. The choice isn't between thinking and not thinking. It's between thinking that serves you and thinking that enslaves you. Between mental activity that moves you forward and mental activity that keeps you spinning in place. Between thoughts that clarify your path and thoughts that cloud your vision. Machiavelli would tell you that your mind is not your master. It's your instrument. And like any instrument, its value comes not from how much noise it can make, but from how precisely it can perform when you need it most. The musician doesn't let the violin play itself. The archer doesn't let the bow choose its target. The prince doesn't let his thoughts choose his actions. You are not your thoughts. You are the one who chooses which thoughts deserve your attention and which thoughts deserve to be dismissed. You are the one who decides whether to follow every mental rabbit trail or to stay focused on the path that leads to your objectives. You are the one who determines whether your mind serves your purposes or whether your purposes get lost in the noise of an undisciplined mind. This is the ultimate realization. Mental clarity isn't about controlling your thoughts. It's about controlling your relationship to your thoughts. It's about becoming the kind of person who can hear the mental chatter without being moved by it, who can feel the pull of anxiety without being dragged into its spiral, who can acknowledge uncertainty without being paralyzed by it. When you reach this point, something profound shifts. Your presence becomes different. Your energy becomes focused. Your decisions become decisive. People start responding to you differently because you're no longer broadcasting confusion and uncertainty. You're radiating the kind of calm, centered energy that comes from a mind that knows what it's doing and where it's going. This isn't the end of thinking. It's the beginning of thinking that matters. It's the transformation from mental activity that drains your energy to mental clarity that multiplies your power. From thoughts that scatter your focus to thoughts that sharpen your edge. From a mind that works against you to a mind that works for you with devastating efficiency. Machiavelli understood that in a world of confused minds, the clear thinker doesn't just have an advantage. They become a force of nature. Unstoppable, not because they never doubt, but because they don't let doubt stop them. Unshakable, not because they never fear, but because they don't let fear choose their actions. Your mind was meant to be your weapon, not your weakness. Your thoughts were meant to be your tools, not your tormentors. Your mental capacity was meant to be your greatest asset, not your heaviest burden. The path back to mental clarity isn't found in more thinking. It's found in thinking that cuts through the noise and gets to what actually matters. Because in the end, the clearest mind wins. Not the busiest, not the most anxious, not the most careful. The clearest. And clarity, once achieved, becomes its own momentum, its own magnetic force, its own unstoppable power that shapes reality instead of just reacting to it. This is what Machiavelli knew. This is what he would teach you. This is how you stop overthinking and start overcoming everything that once seemed impossible to navigate. The battlefield of your mind can finally be won. But only when you stop fighting the wrong war and start fighting the one that actually matters. The war between clarity and confusion, between decisive action and endless analysis, between the person you are when your mind serves you and the person you become when you serve your mind. Choose clarity. Choose decisiveness. Choose the kind of mental discipline that transforms you from someone who thinks about change to someone who creates it. Because that's not just mental clarity, that's mental dominance. And once you have it, everything else becomes possible.